So this might not come as a surprise, but the first thing we're going to have to do is paint the armor white. Now I went directly for painting it white over our kind of mottled sanded color that we originally had. I might do this differently next time. I might do a black base coat or something like that, simply because it took quite a few white coats to fully cover up the sanded mottleness. This step is pretty straightforward. Just make sure that you apply it in enough thin coats to where it doesn't streak, waiting about 20 to 30 minutes in between each coat. It works out pretty well that you can start on the armor, paint each piece individually, and by the time you get back to the first piece of armor, it's been about half an hour. I'm not going to spend too much time on this step since it's pretty simple, so let's keep moving. So once your paint is dried, we can move on to the next step, which is going to be taping. And you can see me just laying here on the floor. I've got some thicker blue masking tape for coverage and some thinner white masking tape to get the really small details. Now I'm sitting here because in front of me, my Xbox is turned on with Battlefront 2 loaded up, and I am displaying the Phase 2 officer. So that way I can get a different angle on a paint job or something. So if you see me use my Xbox controller, that's what I'm doing. And it's always handy to have your source material right in front of you. This step is pretty simple as well. You want to make sure that your design is as perfect as possible. You also want to make sure that your tape adheres to your armor as well as possible. You'll see down the line, as I'm painting, one of my pieces of tape kind of comes undone and flaps off, and I get some paint underneath it. So very important to make sure that you have, one, a good coverage of tape, and two, that your tape is of high quality. Luckily, Battlefront 2 has a pretty good inspect menu for each of the armor classes and different skins, so this was very nice to have for getting different angles and such. For the thigh pads, I couldn't see any design on it because there's a comma on it, but I was able to look at some of the other classes like the Assault or the Specialist to see how their thighs look, and I just went off that. So even though we might not see it, I'd still want it to be accurate. You really don't want to wait too long to paint after you've taped, simply because the longer you wait, the more likely your tape is going to start peeling up and lifting off, which, as I explained earlier, is something we really don't want. So if I had a recommendation, it would be to paint either directly after taping or very shortly after. But once we've got that all done, we can move on to the next step. So this method is optional and kind of depends on the look of the clone trooper armor that you're going for. I'm going for more of a battle-worn look, but if you're going for something like a shiny, you probably wouldn't do this step. We're going to be using a liquid latex. It is kind of like for zombie looks and practical effects and kind of, I don't know, just gore. But what it is, it's a liquid paint that after probably like 20 minutes, it will kind of harden a little bit, but still be kind of rubbery. We're going to paint this on the armor in just kind of random places, and we're going to let it do its thing, harden up, and become kind of just like a balloon material. You guys know what latex is. So we're going to paint that around the armor. And then after we've painted the armor, we can go through and just rub off the latex with our fingers. And what that's going to do is give us a nice like chipped paint look, which really helps bring forward the whole like battle-worn look. So again, if you're doing for more of a brand new, fresh off Camino kind of clone, I probably wouldn't do this step. But if you're looking for a more battle-worn look, this step is pretty valuable. So again, just give it around like 20 to 30 minutes for the latex to fully cure, and then we can start painting it red. Okay, now that the latex is kind of dried up, you can see it's changed color to be kind of a yellow. So we want to leave that on. We're going to be using a Krylon Gloss Cherry Red for our trooper. Again, this is pretty simple. Just do it outside where you have enough area. Do light coats because you don't want it to streak, and just generally take your time. You'll probably want to do 2 to 3 coats. It should cover up the white pretty easily, but make sure you have a good spread. It generally works that, again, as you're painting, all the pieces throughout. By the time you get finished with it and come back to the first piece of armor, you should be ready to apply a second coat. Now there's not much to say about this step, guys. So again, just let your paint fully cure before you bring it back inside. And then we can get on to one of the most satisfying parts of the whole process, peeling off the tape and revealing the paint job. Okay guys, it's really all starting to come together here. When you're peeling off the tape, just remember to peel it slowly. I've accidentally peeled up part of the white paint before, and you definitely don't want that. As you see, I'm looking around for, in some cases, paint does get underneath your tape a little bit, even if you've made sure that it's nice and secure. What we can do about that is just grab like a X-Acto knife or something sharp and just kind of scrape it off. Since it is just paint on paint, you can kind of get away with just chipping it off if it's a small enough piece. Now is also the time to go through and peel off all of the latex. You can generally tell where the areas you applied it to are, since they're raised and kind of like mottled. So just scrape it off with your finger, and you can see that we've got some white paint coming through underneath, really giving it that chipped paint look. As you can see from my growing tape ball, we did use a lot of tape in this project, probably about a full roll. So if you guys are going for a shiny clone, this will probably be one of your last steps. From here on, I'll be showing you some weathering techniques that I use on the armor, but if you're going for a new armor, you don't really need to do those very much. I like my clone troopers to look like they've seen a bit of action at least, so let's move on to the weathering stage. So along with the paint chips, we're going to be doing some scratches, and for that I just grabbed a simple push pin. It works pretty well for taking off kind of long, thin scratches out of the red paint, and we're going to be doing it at about random places all over the armor. This technique should kind of be used sparingly. It's very easy to go overboard at this stage, so just keep that in mind as you're doing it, that you can always add more, but it's a lot harder to undo too much. So I'm just going to go all the way around the armor, adding just a few scratches with my thumbtack all around. We're going to be doing some more scratching techniques later, but this is good for kind of like individual, single, thicker streaks. So this next step is probably going to be the most involved out of the whole painting process. When we're done, the armor is going to look a lot dirtier and a lot more realistic. So you're going to need a few things. Get some black acrylic paint, a cup mixed with some water and paint, a foam brush, and then some paper towels. What we're going to be doing is applying the paint and water mixture over the entire armor, waiting a few seconds for the paint to kind of soak in a bit, and then wiping it off with a paper towel in random directions. This is really going to make the white of the armor a bit grayer and a bit blacker and a bit more worn looking. So as you can see, the water and paint mixture is kind of thin for the first go around. I like to do that just as I'm kind of zeroing in the proper paint to water mixture. If there's too much paint in it, your armor might get dirtier than you anticipated, and it can be really hard to kind of make it white again. So if you have too much water, you can always go over it with more coats or just add more paint to your water mixture. So once I've covered just a small section of the armor, I like to follow up with a paper towel, kind of drying it off. Now it's important here to dry it off in kind of random directions. So what's going to happen is, as you wipe the paper towel over the armor, the black paint is going to kind of smear in the direction that you smear with the paper towel. So if you dry off the paint water mixture in one direction, your paint is going to be smeared in one direction, which really doesn't look realistic. What you're going to want to do is dry it off in kind of random, short directions. This is really going to ensure that your paint is kind of in random directions and looks the most realistic. Now there's not a lot of grooves and detail in this armor, but what the paint is also going to do is, as you paint it over some of the more detailed areas, the black paint is going to sink into those recessed areas, and as you come up with your paper towel to dry it off, the paint in those recessed areas is going to be left there. So what you're left with is a really realistic look where the dirty spots are always the recessed areas, which is how it kind of works in real life. If you think about it, the areas that get brushed off easily are probably the cleanest, whereas the areas that are harder to reach, harder to brush off, are often left dirty. So this technique really brings that to life, so to speak. I'm going to try and show a few comparisons between, the weathered piece and the piece that hasn't been weathered yet. It might be kind of hard to see just because of the lighting, but trust me guys, it makes a big difference. So I'm just going to repeat this whole process for all of the armor, and then we'll move on to the final weathering technique. For this last weathering step, you're going to need some really low grit sandpaper. I went with 60 grit just because that's the lowest I had, but you're going to want some really kind of rough stuff. As you can see, our armor is pretty worn out. It's got some paint chips missing, it's dirty from the paint, and it's got some long, thin scratches on it. What the sandpaper is going to do is it's going to add a lot of little scratches in a single direction. We're also going to be using it to rough up the edges and creases along the armor. These areas of the armor are usually the first to lose their paint since they're easy to rub against stuff. So sanding them down with some high grit sandpaper is going to give us that exact same look. So I just go around the armor again, just randomly in various places and give it a good scratch. Depending on how much sandpaper you have in contact with the armor really changes how many scratches you have. You can use all 4 fingers and scratch it for a really good scratch, or you can fold it and just press with a single finger to get a smaller area of scratches. I go around the rest of the armor and do this basically everywhere. You're going to want to keep your paper towels or a microfiber cloth handy, as this stuff does create a little bit of a mess. As you can see on the shins here, this is kind of what I was talking about earlier about really sanding off the edges. It really makes it look more realistic because, like I said, the edges are usually the first places to lose their paint. I really tried to rough up the knee section of the shin piece a lot since, it's probably going to see the most action from kneeling on the ground, or it's really going to get roughed up. But I also just add a few scratches around the back and sides. The shoulders, I really sanded the edges around it. That's just how it looked in the game, so I thought I'd give it a shot. And again, I'm just giving it a pretty good amount of scratches since the shoulder is another one of those areas that will see a lot of action and debris. The belt is another one of those things that will have a lot of creases and edges, so you'll definitely want to do this method on the belt. So now that I've scratched up all the armor, that completes the weathering process that I like to use. Let's put this thing on and see how it looks. Luckily, the armor turned out pretty simple to put on by myself, so I'll just walk you guys through it. First, I put on the waistband that holds up the thigh, shin, and knee pieces. After that, I put on both thighs and buckle them into place. I find that it's usually best to do the lower body first, because you probably will have a much harder time putting on the lower body when your upper body is on, because it can be pretty hard to bend over. So after the thigh pieces are attached, I'll just slide on both of the knee pieces, and then the shin pieces, and I'll buckle both the shins into place. The knees are just held in with an elastic band, but they stay in place pretty well. There are a few parts of the armor that I still need to complete, like getting the back of the calves situated, as well as the comma and the pauldron. So this will not be the final episode of the clone build series, guys. So if you want to see more, be sure and subscribe for more videos on finishing it. After we've got the lower body, I like to work on the groin, the codpiece, and the butt plate. Just get those situated with Velcro. After that, the abdominal and the back pieces are held together with some elastic straps and snap buttons. So I'll just put those on. After the abs are in place, I like to put on the belt. The belt has kind of a unique assembly. I have another upcoming video showing you guys exactly how I set it up. But in essence, I have a section of it missing so that I can slide it on after the fact, since it's a bit too narrow to slide on over my thighs or try and put my shoulders through it. So next is the torso and back pieces. I like to put on the back piece first since it has some straps that will kind of keep it in place hanging on my back. And then I'll connect it with some buckles to the chest piece. Now the chest piece and the back piece do snap together on the sides, but that's probably the one step of this whole thing where I need somebody's help. So for now, I'm just going to let them hang a bit. Next, I'll just slip on the shoulder and the biceps. This is also held together with an elastic band, just to keep the bicep piece from sliding down my arm. These also buckle into the strap connected to the back piece, so the shoulders should be held in place pretty well. Next comes the elbow pads, again with an elastic strap on the inside, and the more visually appealing white band on the outside. Next come the forearms. These are pretty simple. I can just slide these on. They have some foam padding on the inside to kind of give it a bit more a closer fit. So there you go, guys. That's all of the armor that we painted. And as a special surprise, I wanted to show you guys my helmet. Now I'm going to be working on this in another video, so be sure and keep an eye out for that as well. I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you stick around for the completion of the project. We're almost there, but we have a few important things that need to be done first. So, thanks for watching. I hope to see you again.